Her hands were bleeding, and the mafia boss took off his gloves and carried her. The steam was a liar. It rose from the industrial sink in thick, choking clouds, promising warmth, but the water beneath was a scalding, chemical-laced predator. Elena Caro kept her head down, her world reduced to the scrape of metal on porcelain and the relentless pounding bass that bled through the walls from the club floor. This was her second job of the day, and the clock on the wall, stained with grease, showed it was already past 2 a.m. She was a creature of the back rooms, a janitor and a dishwasher at the Velvet Room, a place that thrived in the city's decay. It was a grimy downtown nightclub that pretended to be high class, all cracked red vinyl and mirrors that had seen too much. It was also a known clearinghouse for the city's less savory elements, a neutral ground where men in sharp suits came to exchange envelopes and whispers. Elena's hands were the price of her survival. They were a roadmap of her exhaustion. The skin was raw, red, and chapped from the bleach and industrial soap. Thin, white scars crisscrossed her knuckles from broken dishes, and angry chemical burns blistered her palms. She wore cheap, thin cotton bandages wrapped around the worst of the cuts, but they were perpetually damp and gray, soaked through with dirty water. She hid the pain, swallowing it down with her pride. Endurance was the only currency she possessed. She worked, she hurt, and she stayed silent. The swinging door to the kitchen burst open, slamming against the rubber stopper. Vince Trello, the club's owner, stood framed in the doorway, his face slick with sweat and his shirt stained. He was a man who enjoyed the small tyrannies his position afforded him. "Caro, you're late." His voice was a rasp. Elena flinched but didn't turn. "The bus," she murmured, plunging a stack of glasses into the gray water. "It was 20 minutes. 20 minutes. You think I care about the bus?" he sneered, walking into the kitchen. He was close enough now that she could smell the stale whiskey on his breath. "You're 20 minutes of my time. My money. I'll stay late," she said, her voice flat, her eyes on the sink. "You're damned right you will." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the thin muscle above her elbow. Elena went rigid. "But first, we got a problem out front." He dragged her out of the kitchen, through the service hallway, and into the main club. The last of the patrons were staggering out, but a small, messy circle of broken glass glittered on the floor near the bar. A drunk customer had swept a row of highball glasses to the ground. "Clean it," Vince ordered. Elena looked around for the broom and dustpan, kept in a nearby closet. "I'll get the—" "No." Vince's smile was cruel. He pointed to her feet, clad in worn, thin-soled sneakers that were barely holding together. "Shoes off." Elena's blood ran cold. "Vince, no, I can't." "You can't?" he mocked, his voice rising. "Or you won't. You think you're better than this floor, Caro. You're late and you're sloppy. Take them off and clean it up. I want to know you feel it. A little reminder." He was doing this for the remaining bouncers, to show he was in charge. Humiliating her was a sport. Shaking, Elena bent down and untied the ruined laces. She slipped off her shoes, her damp socks peeling away. The floor was sticky and cold. She walked to the edge of the glass. "Get on with it," Vince snapped. She took a breath and stepped onto the shards. Tiny, sharp pains shot up her legs. She knelt, her knees protesting, and began to pick up the larger pieces. One by one, with her ruined hands, she focused on the task, on the sting, forcing the tears back. She would not cry, not here. It was then that the front doors opened, letting in a rush of cold night air that cut through the club's stale warmth. The shift in the room was immediate. The two bouncers by the door, who had been laughing at Elena's humiliation, snapped to attention, their faces paling. Vince Trello, in the middle of lighting a cigarette, froze. He didn't walk. He occupied space. Luciano Luke Moretti entered the club flanked by two men who stayed by the door, their eyes scanning the room with a flat, professional emptiness. Luke was tall, and his stillness was more threatening than any movement. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored overcoat, his black hair brushed back from a face that looked carved from hard angles. He wasn't flashy. He was precise. Vince fumbled with his lighter, dropping it. Luke, Mr. Moretti, I wasn't expecting you." Luke's gaze was cold. He didn't look at Vince. He looked at the ledger book sitting open on the bar. The delivery was short. Vince... Again. A mix-up. Vince stammered, scrambling to pick up his lighter, his face a mask of sweat. "Just a small bookkeeping error. I swear, I'll have it fixed." "You had until 10 o'clock, Luke said. His voice was low, a rumble of gravel, but it carried across the empty room. "It is now 2:37. It was only then that his eyes moved. They swept the room, cataloging everything, the bouncers, the panicked owner, and then they landed on Elena. She was still on her knees, frozen. A sharp piece of glass held between her bandaged thumb and forefinger. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. He saw it all. The bare feet, the glittering shards, the raw, bleeding knuckles. His expression did not change. There was no pity, no anger, just a deep, unsettling observation, as if he were filing her away, a minor detail in a larger, flawed equation. He turned his gaze back to Vince. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. "A problem," Luke stated. It was not a question. "No, Luke, no problem," Vince said, stepping in front of Elena, blocking her from Luke's view. "Just cleaning up a little mess. Allow me to get what I owe you. In the back, please." Luke said nothing, just gave a curt nod. Vince all but ran to his office. Luke stood by the bar, waiting. He didn't look at Elena again. She stayed perfectly still, a prisoner of the broken glass. When Vince returned with a thick envelope, Luke took it, counted nothing, and turned to leave. His men fell in behind him, and the door shut, leaving the club in a silence more terrifying than the noise. Vince, vibrating with rage and residual fear, whirled on Elena. "What are you still doing on the floor? Get this place cleaned, then get the hell out of my sight." An hour later, Elena was in the back alley, her final task of the night. The air stank of rot, stale beer, and rain. Her feet had small, stinging cuts, but her hands were the real problem. The club was locked. This was the last thing. She had to lift the heavy, overflowing trash bins so the collection truck could get them in the morning. She gripped the cold metal edge of the first bin. She pulled, her muscles screaming. It wouldn't budge. She tried again, putting her whole body into it. A sharp, searing pain shot from her palm up her arm. She looked down. The largest cut, the one she'd been nursing for a week, had split open again through the cheap bandage. Blood, dark in the single yellow light of the alley, welled up and dripped onto the pavement. It was too much. The glass, the humiliation, the pain, the unending, crushing weight of it all. A sob, hot and ragged, broke from her throat. She leaned her head against the filthy brick wall, and for the first time that night, she cried. She cried in silence, her shoulders shaking, the blood from her hand mixing with the grime on the wall. A car door shut softly at the end of the alley. Elena froze, wiping her face with her one good arm. Footsteps, heavy and measured, echoed on the pavement. She shrank back, trying to make herself invisible. Luciano Moretti stepped out of the shadows. He stood there for a moment, his overcoat unbuttoned. He looked at his bare wrist, then at the ground, as if searching. "Forgot my watch," he said, his voice startling in the quiet. Then he saw her. He saw her pressed against the wall. He saw the overflowing bin, and he saw the dark, steady drip of blood from her hand. Elena watched him, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was a predator, and she was cornered. He reached into his overcoat pocket and pulled out a pair of expensive-looking black leather gloves. He didn't say a word. He just held them out to her, an offering. She stared at the gloves, then at his face. I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Take them," he said. It wasn't a request. She tried to lift her injured hand to show him why she couldn't, but it was shaking too badly, covered in fresh blood. He stepped closer, into the small pool of light. He looked from her face to her hands. He really looked at them. He saw the raw, chemical-burned skin, the old white scars, the new, gaping wound. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, wordlessly. He put his own expensive gloves back into his pocket. "What are you?" she started to say. edging along the wall. He moved before she could finish the thought. It was fast, efficient, and utterly terrifying. One arm slid under her knees, the other came around her back, lifting her off her feet as if she weighed nothing. A strangled cry escaped her. "No, put me down, I have to work." "You have to bleed?" he countered, his voice rough. He was already walking, carrying her away from the filth, toward the gleaming black sedan parked at the mouth of the alley. The car looked like a void, a shadow waiting to swallow her. He opened the passenger door and went to place her inside, the second her back touched the cold, impossibly soft leather. A different kind of panic seized her. It was the confinement. The click of the lock, the sudden, overwhelming scent of him, clean wool and something metallic, and the sheer, terrifying reality of being trapped by a man. She didn't scream. She fought. "Let me go." Her voice was a choked rasp. She clawed at the door handle, her bloody hand smearing on the polished wood trim. "Don't touch me! Get off me!" It was a primal, desperate reaction, born from a place deeper and darker than the alley. Luke was in the driver's seat, the door still open. He hadn't started the car. He hadn't moved to restrain her. He simply watched her, his face unreadable in the dashboard's dim glow. He held his hands up, palms out, showing they were empty. "I am not touching you," he said, his voice flat and even. "I'm not moving." He just sat there, giving her the space. He didn't yell. He didn't grab her. He waited. The sheer stillness of him was more disorienting than an attack. Her panic, finding no purchase, slowly receded, leaving her exhausted and shaking, huddled against the door. He waited another 10 seconds. "May I close my door?" She nodded, biting her lip, tasting her own blood. He shut the door. The heavy thud sealed them in. He started the car, the engine a low, powerful purr. He drove, not fast, just smoothly, through the crumbling, sleeping city. Elena stared out the window, watching the broken streetlights pass. "Where are you taking me?" "A doctor." He didn't take her to a hospital. There were too many questions at a hospital. He pulled up to a quiet, unmarked brownstone in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. He got out, came around, and opened her door. But he didn't offer a hand. He waited for her to move. She slid out, her legs unsteady. Inside, it was sterile, quiet, and felt illegal. A thin man in a medical coat, his eyes weary, was waiting. He didn't ask her name. "Hand," he said. Luke spoke from the doorway. "Clean the burns, stitch the cut, discreetly." He placed a thick wad of bills on the counter. The doctor nodded. All business. The cleaning was agony. The stitches were sharp, pulling stings, but the doctor was quick, and when he was done, her hands were wrapped in clean, white, thick gauze. They looked alien, like paws. When she came out, Luke was standing by the window, looking out at the empty street. He turned. "I have to go back," she said immediately, the words sounding foolish even to her. "Vince, he'll fire me." Luke looked at her, really looked at her, as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "That job is killing you. He's killing you. It's all I have," she whispered, shame and defiance warring in her. He drove her, but not to the club. He stopped 2 blocks away. The sky was turning a sickly gray, the first hint of dawn. He cut the engine. "I can't pay you back," she said, staring at her bandaged hands. "For the doctor." It was not a loan. He reached into his coat and pulled out a simple, cream-colored business card. It had only a name, Luciano Moretti, and a 10-digit number. "What is this?" "An option," he said. "If you ever decide you want out, if you want something else." She took the card. The thick stalk felt heavy, dangerous. "I don't even know what you do." A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "I'm in the collections business." He started the car. "Go on." She got out. She didn't say thank you. She just walked away, the clean bandages stark against her dirty clothes. She walked the 2 blocks, her mind reeling. But when she turned the corner to the Velvet Room, Vince was waiting on the sidewalk, smoking, vibrating with rage. He must have seen the black sedan pull away. "So," Vince sneered, tossing his cigarette into the gutter, "you left with him. What did you tell him? You little rat." Huh? Spying for him? No, Elena said, exhausted. I don't know him. I cut my hand. He took me to a doctor. A doctor? Vince laughed, a short, ugly bark. Moretti doesn't take dishwashers to doctors, you stupid girl. He buys them, or he buries them. What did you promise him? Nothing. Get out. He spat on the ground near her feet. You're done. You're fired. You talked to him. You're poisoned now. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and a few ones, and threw them at her feet. That's what you're owed. Don't ever let me see your face again. He went inside, and she heard the deadbolt slam home. Elena stood on the sidewalk as the sun began to rise, painting the clouds in shades of gray and dirty pink. She looked at the money on the pavement. $24. She looked at her clean bandages. She looked at the business card clutched in her good hand. She was fired. She had no money. She had nowhere to go, and her hands were still bleeding, underneath the gauze. The smell of stale urine and chemical disinfectant was a thick, cold blanket. It clung to the damp air of the bus station restroom, a place meant for transient misery, not for sleep. Elena Caro had her knees drawn to her chest, her back wedged into the corner of the stall, the one with the broken lock. She'd been there for 2 days. Her $24 had bought her a bottle of water and 3 stale protein bars from a vending machine. The rest she hoarded. Sleep was impossible. Every time a door slammed or footsteps echoed on the cracked tile, her body would jolt, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was running on the fumes of fear. The clean white gauze on her hands was already gray. The clinic doctor had given her a small bottle of pills for the pain and infection, but she'd lost them somewhere in the blur of the first night. A deep, aching throb had started in her left palm, radiating up her arm. She was cold, but she was also burning. A fever was fogging the edges of her mind. She must have dozed, a shallow, restless dip into unconsciousness, because the next thing she knew, a shadow blocked the thin light coming over the stall door. Elena's eyes snapped open. A man was standing there. He wasn't one of the usual lost souls of the station. He was clean. He wore a dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a face that was completely, professionally blank. He wasn't looking at her, but at the broken lock. Miss Caro? His voice was quiet, polite. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever heard. Elena scrambled, trying to push herself deeper into the wall. Who are you? Go away. My name is Marco. He didn't try to open the door. He simply stood on the other side. I am here on behalf of Mr. Moretti. He has been concerned for your welfare. He fired me, she whispered, her voice cracking. No, Vince fired me. We are aware, Marco said. Mr. Moretti is waiting outside. He wishes to offer you an alternative to this. I don't want his help. I don't want anything from him. With respect, miss, Marco said, his tone unchanging. This is not help. This is an offer of employment and a place to stay while you get back on your feet. A place to stay, she repeated, the words tasting like acid. She knew what that meant. She knew what men like him expected when they offered a woman a place to stay. No, tell him no. There was a long silence. She heard the man sigh, a small, frustrated puff of air. Mister? Moretti anticipated this response. He also instructed me to tell you that pride is a luxury, and you are currently destitute. He asks you to be practical. Go away, she shouted, or tried to. It came out as a hoarse croak. Very well. Marco's shadow retreated. Elena let out a shaking breath, the adrenaline turning sour in her veins. She waited, listening to his footsteps fade, the click of the restroom door. She was alone again. She was safe. She tried to stand, to prove to herself that she could. Her legs felt like water, her head like a lead weight. The room tilted violently. The throb in her hand exploded into a starburst of white-hot pain, and the grimy floor rushed up to meet her. The last sound she heard was the heavy restroom door swinging open again. When she woke up, the world was silent. The silence was the first thing she noticed, not the distant roar of buses, not the hiss of plumbing, not the murmur of lost voices, just a deep, profound quiet, like a blanket of new snow. The second thing she noticed was the light. It wasn't the flickering yellow of the bus station or the harsh blue of the alley. It was soft, gray morning light, pouring in from a window that seemed to be the size of an entire wall. She was on a couch so large and soft it felt like sinking into a cloud. The material under her cheek was a fine, smooth wool, not the vinyl of a bus station bench. She was covered by a cashmere throw blanket, impossibly light and warm. Elena sat up too fast. The room spun, and she fell back against the cushions with a groan. Her head pounded. Easy. The voice came from across the room. She turned her head, wincing. Luciano Moretti was sitting in a dark leather armchair, a steaming white mug held in his hands. He wasn't in his overcoat. He wore a simple black sweater and dark pants. He looked less like a crime boss and more like a man in his own home, which, she realized, this was no safe apartment, and this was a penthouse. The room was massive, all clean lines, dark wood, gray stone, and glass. The view behind him was the entire city skyline, laid out like a carpet of glittering jewels. Even in the morning light, it was a place of impossible wealth and power. "Where am I?" she rasped. "My home." He gestured to a glass of water and 2 white pills on the polished wood coffee table in front of her. "Your hand was infected. The fever broke about an hour ago. A doctor saw you while you were unconscious. He administered antibiotics." She looked at her hand. The gray, filthy bandages were gone. In their place was a professional, sterile white wrapping, taped neatly at the wrist. "Marco," she said, remembering. I told him no." "You did." Luke agreed. "Then you collapsed." It made the decision simpler. She pushed herself up, slower this time. Ignoring the dizziness, she swung her legs over the side of the couch. Her dirty, ruined sneakers had been removed. Her feet were bare. The rug beneath them was thick and soft. She saw her own grimy jacket and backpack in a heap by the door, as if they were a contagion that had been contained. "I have to go," she said, trying to find the conviction in her voice. "Where?" he asked. It wasn't a challenge, it was a simple question. "Back to the bus station? You will be dead in 3 days, or worse. That's not your problem." "It became my problem when I saw you on your knees in Trello's club," he said, his voice flat. "It became my problem when you smeared blood on the inside of my car." He stood up, not menacingly, just moving. He was tall, and the space seemed to mold around him. "This is the arrangement, Elena. You will stay here. You will eat, you will recover. There is a room for you." He pointed to a closed door. "It has its own lock. You will be safe." "Safe?" she scoffed, clutching the blanket. "From what? Everyone but you?" He looked at her, his gaze intense, analytical. "I'm offering you a sanctuary, not a cage. I will not touch you. I will not ask anything of you that you do not offer." He set his mug down. "The alternative is the street. The choice is yours. But if you choose the street, I won't send Marco for you again." She stared at him, searching for the lie. She was a mouse, and he was a hawk, and he was telling her he just wanted to watch her eat. It made no sense. But the memory of the bus station, the cold, the smell. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why do this?" "I have my reasons," he said. "Get some more sleep. There is food in the kitchen when you are ready." He walked out of the room, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floors, leaving her alone in the vast, quiet space. The next few days were a strange, disorienting truce. Elena stayed in the guest room, a space larger than her entire old apartment, with its own bathroom filled with soaps and towels that probably cost more than her last paycheck. She locked the door every night. Luke kept his word. He was a ghost. He would be gone when she woke. The apartment silent. Food would appear in the refrigerator, fresh fruit, sealed containers of soup, bread. He left a stack of new, simple clothes on her bed, plain gray and black sweaters, soft pants, socks, nothing provocative, just practical. Warm and clean, she felt like a stray cat, slowly, cautiously emerging from under the porch. She was overwhelmed by the luxury, but more so by the absolute, crushing isolation. She was a prisoner of comfort. On the fourth night, the fever was gone, and her hand had been reduced to a dull ache. She was starving. She crept out of her room, drawn by the smell of real food. Luke was in the kitchen, not the sterile, empty space she'd been raiding, but a massive, professional-grade kitchen. He was standing over the stove, stirring something in a pot. He had his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. He didn't turn. "There is enough for two." She hesitated in the doorway. I don't want to intrude. It's just pasta," he said, turning off the heat. He retrieved 2 bowls, his movements economical and precise. He ladled a simple, rich-smelling tomato sauce over the pasta and slid 1 bowl onto the massive kitchen island. "Eat." She sat, perching on the edge of the stool. He sat opposite her. They ate in silence for several minutes. It was the best food she had ever tasted, or maybe she was just that hungry. "It's good," she said, her voice small. He nodded, not looking up. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of silverware on porcelain. It was different from the silence of the bus station. This was an interrogative silence. She put her fork down. She had to know. Why help someone like me? Luke stopped eating. He stared into his bowl for a long moment, as if the answer were written in the sauce. When he finally looked up, his eyes were not cold. They were ancient, filled with a different kind of exhaustion than her own. "Because I was too late once before," he said, his voice low. He told her. Not a confession, just a statement of fact. His younger sister, Sophia, she was 16. She wasn't involved in his life. He had kept her separate, or thought he had. She was working at a small bakery, saving for college, a rival family. The Salernos had decided to send him a message. They didn't target him. They targeted the bakery. "It was a simple crossfire," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "A man reciting a weather report. A territorial dispute, that's what the papers said. They shot up the wrong block. She was just in the way. Behind the counter." He looked at his own hands, large, strong, and scarred. "I was a 10-minute drive away, closing a deal. 10 minutes. By the time I got there, she was gone. I couldn't save her." He looked back at Elena, and she finally understood. "I saw you in that club, bleeding on the floor, and that vermin mocking you. It was familiar, and I couldn't save my sister, but maybe I can do something right this one time. Maybe I can be on time." He went back to his food, the conversation over. Elena just watched him, her heart aching with a strange, unfamiliar empathy. He wasn't a hawk, he was a dragon, guarding a hoard of his own grief. The truce shifted after that. She still kept her distance, but the fear was replaced by a hesitant curiosity. She no longer locked her door. A week later, she was reading a book she'd found on one of his shelves, curled up on the massive couch. It was late, past midnight. She heard the front door open, the heavy click of the lock. It was normal. He always came in late, but tonight was different. She heard a thud, a heavy weight against the wall in the foyer, then a sound, a sharp intake of breath that was cut off by a curse. Elena was on her feet before she even thought about it. She ran to the entryway. Luke was leaning against the wall, his whole body tense. His black overcoat was gone. His white shirt was not white. It was soaked. A dark, glistening crimson from his shoulder down his left side. His face was pale, beaded with sweat, and there was a deep, bleeding gash over his right eyebrow. He looked up as she approached, his eyes unfocused for a second before they sharpened, locking on her. "Luke!" "Go back to your room, Elena." He ground out, pushing himself off the wall. He swayed, and his left hand, was wrapped around his right side, blood seeping between his fingers. "You're hurt," she said, stating the obvious. "A disagreement," he hissed, trying to move past her toward his office. "With the Salernos, you're bleeding." She grabbed his arm, the good one. He flinched at her touch, but she held on. "You need a doctor." "No doctors," he said, shaking his head. "No hospitals. They'll have men watching." He stumbled, and she caught him, her small frame straining under his weight. She realized, in that moment, that the power dynamic had completely, terrifyingly, reversed. "Where?" she demanded, her voice hard, the voice she used to use on lazy bus drivers. "Where's the first aid kit?" He pointed vaguely. "My bathroom, big cabinet." She half-dragged, half-guided him through the penthouse, into his own massive, dark-themed bedroom, and into the adjoining bathroom. It was a cavern of black marble. She sat him down on the closed lid of the toilet, his head falling back against the wall. She found the kit. It wasn't a small plastic box, it was a professional-grade trauma bag. She opened it. Her hands, still tender, but no longer bandaged. Shaking, gauze, antiseptic, butterfly stitches, tape, shirt, she said. He tried to unbutton it, but his fingers were slick with his own blood. "Damn it," he muttered. "Stop." Elena grabbed a pair of shears from the kit. She cut the expensive shirt from his body, fabric and blood parting, revealing the damage beneath. It was bad. The cut over his eye was deep, but the real problem was his side. It looked like a deep puncture, a knife wound, oozing dark blood, and his knuckles were split open, bruised and bloody. He had been in a fight, a real one. She went to work. The alley, the bus station, the filth, they had prepared her for this. She wasn't a guest in a penthouse. She was a survivor, and he was wounded. She started with his face. She poured antiseptic onto a cloth, and he hissed as she pressed it to the gash on his brow. "Hold still," she commanded. He obeyed. Her touch was not gentle, but it was efficient. She cleaned the cut, her fingers steady, and applied 3 butterfly stitches, pulling the skin together. He watched her, his dark eyes intense, tracking her every move. Then she moved to his hands. She took his large, scarred, bloody hand in her own. She remembered him looking at her hands in the alley. Now she was the one cleaning the wounds, wiping away the grime and blood to see the broken skin beneath. She wrapped them tightly in gauze. Finally, his side. This was the one that scared her. "This is deep. Luke, it needs stitches. Real ones." "No," he said, his voice strained. "Just clean it, pack it, tape it. I'll call my own man in the morning." She did as he asked, her hands covered in his blood. She packed the wound with sterile gauze, her stomach roiling, and taped it with all her strength, creating a pressure bandage. He never made a sound, but his whole body was rigid, his jaw clenched so tight she thought it might break. When she was done, she was kneeling in front of him, spent. They were both covered in his blood. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a strange, vibrating intimacy in its wake. "Elena," he whispered. She looked up. He reached out, his unwounded, unbandaged hand, and slowly, tentatively, brushed her cheek. His thumb was rough, calloused, and it traced the line of her jaw, sweeping a stray piece of hair back. It was the softest touch she had ever known. She didn't pull away. Instead, she found her own hand, the one that was mostly healed, reaching out. She didn't touch his face. She touched his hand, the one he had just used to touch her. She laid her palm against his, her fingers tracing the old, white scars on his knuckles, the ones that had been there long before tonight. He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. They just breathed. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and blood, but all she could feel was the warmth of his skin, the surprising softness of his breath against her face. He was too heavy to move back to the bed. She was too exhausted to stand. "The couch," she murmured. She helped him limp to the living room, to the couch where she had woken up. He collapsed onto it, lying on his back. He groaned as his side protested. Elena grabbed the cashmere blanket from the back of the chair and draped it over him. She pulled the coffee table closer, put the glass of water and the pain pills on it. She should go back to her room. She should leave, but she couldn't. She sat on the floor, her back against the couch, near his shoulder, just to watch, just to make sure he kept breathing. "Elena," he said again, his voice thick with pain and exhaustion. "Stay." She looked at him. He shifted, a small, pained movement, making room for her on the wide cushion. It was not an invitation to passion. It was a plea for presence. Slowly, she climbed up, lying on her side, on top of the blanket, her back to the room. She was on the very edge of the couch, leaving feet of space between them, but he shifted again, a small grunt of pain, moving closer until his back was against hers. Just solid, warm contact. She expected to lie awake all night, her nerves screaming, but the heat from his body, the steady puff his breathing, the sheer exhaustion of the night, it all combined. He was the first to drift off. She felt the tension leave his body. A few minutes later, she found herself shifting, turning over, and her head, of its own accord, found the pillow of his good shoulder. She fell asleep, safe in the arms of the most dangerous man she had ever met. Luke did not sleep. He lay there, every muscle aching, his side a bonfire of pain, but he did not move. He watched her. He watched the way her face, finally free of fear, relaxed in sleep. He watched the steady rise and fall of her chest. She had seen him broken, bloody and weak, and she had not run. She had cut his shirt off and put him back together. He looked at the skyline, the city lights just beginning to fade into the pre-dawn gray. He felt the light weight of her head on his shoulder, the warmth of her breath on his skin. He had saved her from the street, but tonight, she had saved him from bleeding out on his own marble floor. Silently, he made a new resolution. It was not just about his sister anymore. He would keep Elena Caro safe. He would rain down hellfire on anyone who tried to harm her. He would protect her, not because she was like his sister, but because she was Elena, and she was asleep on his shoulder. To breathe clean air was a revelation. Elena's new world smelled of pollen, damp earth, and the sharp green snap of freshly cut stems. Luke had given her a job, not with a question, but as a statement. The small, elegant flower shop was called Carmine Street Flowers, a quiet, unassuming business in a respectable neighborhood. It was, Marco had explained on her first day, one of Mr. Moretti's legitimate enterprises. A front, a place to wash money, Elena assumed, but she did not ask. She was given the books, a small desk in a cold back room, away from the bright, welcoming burst of lilies and roses at the front. It was the first time in her life anyone had trusted her with numbers. She learned the ledgers, the invoices, the payroll for the 3 other employees. She learned the rhythm of the business, which was slow, predictable, and clean. A new person began to emerge from the wreckage of the old, her hands, no longer subjected to bleach and scalding water, healed. The skin was still scarred, but it was soft. The stitches were long gone, leaving only a thin, white line on her palm, a reminder. With her first real paycheck, a thick envelope of cash. Because Luke did not deal in banks for people he was hiding, she bought new clothes. Not the soft grays he had provided, but clothes of her own. Dark jeans, sturdy boots, 2 sweaters that were warm and thick. She still lived at the penthouse. It was a gilded cage, but it was safe. Luke remained a protective, looming presence. More shadow than man. He was gone most days, busy with his other, darker business. But his protection was absolute. She never waited for a bus. Marco was always waiting, engine idling, to take her to and from the shop. She never paid for food. The kitchen was always stocked. But the world was watching. The other women in the shop, a florist and 2 part-time assistants, treated her with a delicate, fearful respect. They saw the black car. They saw the quiet, serious man who drove her. They saw the way she would sometimes stare at her hands, lost in a memory they could not access. Rumors began to circulate. The whispers were inevitable. She was not an employee. She was a possession. She was Luciano Moretti's new mistress. Elena heard it one afternoon from a delivery driver, arguing with the florist. "I'm not waiting. Go get Moretti's girl to sign for it. She's the one in charge. Right?" The words hit her like a slap. She felt the blood drain from her face. She was not his mistress. She slept in her own room, behind a door he never approached. Their relationship, if it could be called that, was one of quiet dinners eaten in silence and the shared trauma of the night she had stitched him together. But she knew how it looked. The tension settled in her shoulders, a familiar, heavy weight. The tension in the city was growing, too. Luke became darker, his silences longer. He came home later, if he came home at all. The gash over his eye had healed, but a new, grim set had taken its place. "The Salerno," he said one night, staring out the window at the city lights. He had not spoken for an hour. "They're getting desperate. They're breaking the old rules." "What rules?" she asked, her voice small. He turned, his eyes finding hers in the darkness. "They're targeting families, wives, people who are not in the game." He paused. "Be more careful. Elena, do not go anywhere without Marco. Do not walk alone, not even for a block." His warning settled over her, cold and suffocating. She was a bird in a cage, and now she knew the hawks were circling. It was that feeling of suffocation that made her do it. After 2 weeks of being ferried from the penthouse to the shop and back, she felt the walls closing in. She needed to feel the pavement under her own feet. She needed, just for 10 minutes, to be normal. She told Marco she was staying late to finish payroll. He nodded, his face impassive, and said he would wait. The moment his back was turned, she slipped out the rear exit of the shop. It was a cold, bright afternoon. She just wanted to go to the corner market to buy her own apple, with her own money. It was a stupid, childish rebellion. She walked the 2 blocks, her head down, her heart pounding with a forbidden thrill. She bought the apple. She was standing on the corner, shining it on her sleeve, when she realized a shortcut home, through a familiar alley, would get her back to the shop before Marco even noticed she was gone. She took the shortcut. It was a mistake. The alley was narrow, smelling of old garbage and cold brick. Halfway through, they stepped out from behind a stack of rotted pallets. There were 3 of them. They wore dark hoodies and plain black masks. These were not common muggers. "Well, well," the first one said. He was big, and his voice was a low growl. "Look what we found! Moretti's girl, all alone." Elena's blood turned to ice. She backed up, hitting the opposite wall. "I don't have any money. We don't want your money, sweetheart," the second one said, fanning out to her left. "We just want to send a message to your boss. I just work for him." "Yeah, we know how you work." The first one sneered, and he lunged. Elena didn't scream. She reacted. The survival instincts of the street, honed by years of grime and fear, took over. As he grabbed her, she drove her knee up, hard into his groin. He roared, a sound of pained surprise, and loosened his grip. She shoved him and ran. She almost made it. She was 5 feet from the mouth of the alley when the second man tackled her, grabbing her by the jacket and slamming her against the brick wall. Her head snapped back, hitting the hard surface. Stars exploded in her vision. The apple flew from her hand. "Feisty," the third man said, pulling a knife. "He'll like that." The first man recovered, grabbed her arms, pinning her. "Hold her still." Elena fought, kicking, scratching, a wild animal in a trap. She felt a sharp, searing pain in her forearm as the knife's edge grazed her. She saw the third man raise his fist, and then a sound, a sharp crack, echoed in the narrow space. It was not a firecracker. The man holding her knife went stiff. A small, dark circle appeared on his chest. He looked down at it, confused, and then crumpled to the ground. The second man, the one who had tackled her, turned. A second crack. He fell backward, his head hitting the pavement with a sickening thud. It was over in 2 seconds. The third man, the leader, stared in mute terror. He let go of Elena, who slid to the ground and raised his hands. Luciano Moretti stood at the mouth of the alley, his arm extended, a black pistol held steady in his hand. He was not in a suit. He was in jeans and a dark Henley, his hair uncombed. He looked like he had run from his car. His face was a mask of cold, absolute fury. He walked forward, his steps measured, the gun never wavering from the third man's head. "She is not to be touched," Luke said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Luke, please." The man stammered. "It was just a message. Salerno's orders. Get on your knees." The man dropped, sobbing. "Please." Luke's eyes flicked to Elena, huddled on the ground, her arm bleeding. That glance sealed the man's fate. Luke turned his attention back to him. "You will tell Salerno that if he ever ever comes near her again, I will burn his entire family to the ground. You will tell him I am coming for him. Now." He gestured with the gun. "Run." The man scrambled to his feet and fled, disappearing down the alley. Luke did not watch him go. The gun vanished into the back of his waistband, and he was at Elena's side, kneeling in the filth. "Elena, you're hurt." He didn't check the bodies. He didn't look at the blood on the pavement. His entire world had shrunk to her. He reached for her, his hands hovering, as if he was afraid to touch her. She just stared at him, her body shaking in violent, uncontrollable waves. Then she looked at the two bodies, still and silent, lying mere feet from her. A car door slammed. Marco was there, his face pale. "Boss, the police." "Clean it," Luke ordered, his voice raw. He scooped Elena into his arms just as he had in the alley behind the Velvet Room. But this time, she didn't fight. She clung to him, burying her face in his shirt, a strangled sob tearing from her throat. He carried her to his car, not the black sedan, but a low, dark muscle car. He put her in the passenger seat and was in the driver's seat before she could even take a breath. The car roared to life, tires screeching as he pulled away from the curb, leaving Marco to handle the wreckage. He drove fast, his jaw set, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He drove out of the city, past the suburbs, onto dark, winding country roads. They didn't speak. The only sound was the roar of the engine and Elena's quiet, shaking sobs. An hour later, he pulled up to a small, isolated house set deep in a thicket of pine trees. It was modern, all dark wood and glass, but it looked like a fortress. He got out, came around, and opened her door. He helped her out, his hand on her good arm, and led her inside. The interior was sparse but warm, a fireplace, a simple couch, a kitchen. He engaged a series of heavy deadbolts and, she noticed, lowered steel shutters over the windows with the flip of a switch. They were sealed in. He turned to her. She was standing in the middle of the room, her jacket torn, her arm bleeding, her face pale. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a cold, hollow terror in its place. I, she started, but her voice broke. "It's okay," he said, his voice rough. "You're safe." "No," she screamed, the word tearing from her. I'm not safe. Don't you see?" She slid down the wall, her legs giving out, and buried her head in her hands. "I'm not safe anywhere. I thought I could survive anything, the hunger, the cold, Vince. I thought I was strong." She looked up, her eyes wide with a terrible, broken clarity. "But they weren't trying to rob me. They were trying to use me. I'm just a message, a thing. I'm the cut of meat you send to the other wolf, and I can't survive that. I'm not strong enough, not for this." The sobs that came out of her were not the silent tears of the alley. They were racking, desperate, agonizing sounds of a soul that had finally found its breaking point. Luke watched her, his face carved from stone. He let her cry for a full minute, her pain echoing in the small, fortified room. Then he crossed the space and knelt in front of her. He didn't speak. He didn't offer platitudes. He reached out and, with a thumb that was rough and calloused, he gently brushed a tear from her cheek. His touch was a shock, a point of warmth in the freezing cold of her fear. She looked at him, her breath hitching. "Luke." "I know," he whispered. His eyes held hers. They were not cold. They were burning. He leaned in, so slowly, and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of reverence, a promise, a vow. It said, "I am here." She closed her eyes, her body trembling. He pulled back, just an inch, his forehead resting against hers. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. "Elena," he murmured, his voice a gravelly rumble. She tilted her chin up, her lips parted on a shaky breath. He watched her, a silent question in his eyes, and then he lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was impossibly soft. It was tentative, a mere brush of lips, exploring, asking. It was not demanding. It was not a claim. It was an anchor. He tasted of the cold night air and of a strength she could not comprehend. A small sound escaped her, a sigh of surrender, and she leaned into him. That was all it took. The kiss deepened, but it remained tender. It was a release of all the fear, all the tension, all the unspoken things that had lived between them in the silence of the penthouse. Her hands, the hands that had been broken and healed, came up, trembling, to his chest. She fumbled, her fingers finding the buttons of his Henley. She wanted the jacket gone. She wanted the layers gone. She needed to feel him. He stopped kissing her, pulling back. His eyes were dark, his breathing ragged. "Elena?" he asked, his voice rough, checking in. He was giving her an out. She didn't speak. She couldn't. She just looked at him, her eyes clear and unwavering, and her shaking fingers undid the first button. A low sound rumbled in his chest. That was his answer. He stood, pulling her up with him. He shed his jacket, letting it fall to the floor. His hands went to the hem of her torn, bloodied sweater. He paused, his thumbs just grazing her skin. "Is this okay?" She nodded, her throat tight. He lifted the sweater over her head, his touch gentle, almost clinical, as he inspected the shallow cut on her arm. It was already clotting. He seemed satisfied. He led her, not in a rush, but with a deliberate, steady pace, to the small, dark bedroom. He turned on a single, low lamp, casting the room in a warm, amber glow. He sat her on the edge of the bed and knelt, unlacing her boots and sliding them from her feet. His hands were so large, his touch so careful. When he stood, he unbuttoned his shirt, the one she had started, and pulled it off. His chest was a landscape of old scars and hard muscle. He was not a soft man, but when he looked at her, his eyes were... He sat on the bed next to her, not touching, just giving her the space. "You're shaking," he whispered. "I know," she said. It's not fear. Not of you." He held out his hand. She took it. He laced his fingers with hers. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles, her palm, the thin white scar. He pulled her toward him, and she went, lying down on the covers, their bodies pressed together. He kissed her again, and this time there was a fire beneath the tenderness. It was a kiss of longing, of two people who had been alone for too long. It was the desperation of the alley, transformed into a desperate need for life, for contact, for the solid, living proof that they were still here. He unbuttoned her jeans, his movements slow, his eyes never leaving hers, asking at every step. She arched into his touch, her hands exploring his shoulders, his back, the warmth of his skin. This was not about power, or possession, or messages. This was about respect. It was about the release of her terror and the grounding of his protection. After, they lay tangled in the sheets, her head on his chest, his arm heavy and warm around her. The steel shutters made the room perfectly dark, perfectly silent. For the first time, she couldn't hear the city. She was tracing the old, faded scar on his side, the one she had cleaned and bandaged in his penthouse. He was watching her, his fingers slowly combing through her hair. A small smile, the first genuine, unguarded smile of her adult life, touched her lips. "What?" he whispered, his voice deep. She looked up at him, her eyes clear in the shadows. "I'm not scared." And for the first time, in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city, in a house built to withstand a war, she was telling the absolute truth. The safe house was a bubble. For 3 days, the world was nothing but the scent of pine, the crackle of a wood fire, and the 4 walls of the hidden house. The steel shutters remained down, sealing them in, and the silence was a tangible thing, broken only by their own voices. They were, for the first time, just a man and a woman. They cooked. Elena discovered, to her quiet amusement, that Luciano Moretti, a man who commanded a criminal empire, was useless in a kitchen. He burned the toast 2 times. He used salt instead of sugar. On the second night, she found him staring at a box of pasta, his expression as grim as if he were facing a rival. "Let me," she said, gently nudging him aside. She, who had made meals from stale bread and ketchup packets, took the simple ingredients and made a sauce from scratch. They ate at the small wooden table, not in silence, but with a new, hesitant conversation. He asked her where she was from, and she told him about the Gray, anonymous suburb she had run from. She asked him, Nothing. She was afraid to break the spell. The healing was not just physical. Her arm, where the knife had grazed her, was healing. An angry red line. His wounds from the fight with the Salernos were long, faded scars, but the other, deeper wounds, the fear in her, the grief in him, began to ease. On the third morning, he was trying to make coffee, and he dropped the entire bag of beans. They scattered across the floor like dark, rattling marbles. He stood there, staring at the mess with an air of profound defeat. Elena, watching from the doorway, laughed. It was not a small, polite sound. It was a real, unrestrained laugh, bubbling up from a place that had been silent for years. The sound shocked her into silence. It shocked him more. He looked up, his face a mask of surprise, and then a slow, unused smile cracked his own hard features. He laughed, too, a low, rough rumble. They cleaned up the mess together, their hands brushing, and for a few hours, they were just people. The bubble popped on the fourth day. It was not a sound, but a presence, a knock. It was not a casual knock. It was a code. Luke was on his feet, his gun in his hand before the second tap. He looked through the peephole. "Marco," he breathed, his shoulders dropping. He unbolted the heavy door. Marco was not in a suit. He was in fatigues, his face pale and grim. He carried a heavy duffel bag of supplies, which he dropped inside the door. He did not look at Elena. He looked only at Luke. "Boss," he said, and the single word was filled with dread. "It's Trello, Vince Trello." Luke's face went hard. The man who burned toast was gone. The mafia boss was back. "What about him?" "He's been talking," Marco said, his voice low and fast. "To everyone. He's the one who gave you up to the Salernos. He's the one who told them where to find." He glanced at Elena. "The weakness. And he's been talking to the police. He's trying to cut a deal, trading his intel on you for his own freedom." Luke's silence was more violent than any shout. He simply nodded, absorbing the betrayal. "That's not all," Marco said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, clear plastic bag, like the kind used for evidence. Inside was a single, folded piece of paper. "We found this, tucked inside the lining of Miss Caro's jacket from the alley. They must have planted it on her during the attack." Luke took the bag. He pulled out the note with a gloved hand. Elena didn't need to read it. She could see the words from across the room, scrawled in a thick, angry red marker. "You bleed for him, you'll die for him." The room was suddenly cold. The smell of pine was gone, replaced by the scent of the city, of rot and danger. Luke turned, his face unreadable. He walked to a small, secure satellite phone in the corner. He began to dial. "Marco," he said, his back to them. "Get the plane ready, fuel it, West Coast. I want new papers for her by midnight." Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. "What?" Luke ignored her, speaking into the phone. "I need a package moved. Tonight, clean, sterile, no trace." "Luke, what are you doing?" Elena said, walking toward him. He held up a hand, silencing her. He finished the call and turned. His eyes were cold. Not cruel, but shut. He was managing a problem. "You're leaving tonight. Elena, I'm sending you somewhere safe. A new name, a new life. They will never find you." "A new life," she repeated, the words tasting like ash. "You mean a new cage, a new safe house, just further away." "This is not a discussion," he said, his voice flat. "They targeted you. They put their hands on you. They marked you. This is the only way to keep you alive." "No." He looked at her, surprised by the sudden, hard edge in her voice. "No, no," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. She stepped toward him, jabbing a finger at his chest. "I am not a package to be moved. I'm not a problem to be managed. I am not the girl you found in the bus station anymore. Elena, you don't understand the world you're in." "I understand my world," she shot back, her voice rising. "And in my world, you don't run. You fight or you die, but you don't get put in a box by someone who thinks they know better. You don't get to save me and then shut me out." She was close now, her eyes flashing. "I am not your sister. Luke, I am not the ghost you're trying to save. I am here. I am breathing, and I am not running." He stared at her, his jaw working. The muscle in his cheek twitched. He saw not the terrified woman from the alley, but the one who had stitched him up, the one who had laughed at his cooking, the one who was now standing her ground, ready to fight him. He was silent for a full minute. Marco, by the door, looked like he wanted to evaporate. Finally. Luke nodded once, a short, sharp gesture. Fine. He turned to Marco. Leave the bag. Go. Be ready. Marco disappeared, the door locking heavily behind him. Luke turned back to Elena. If you are staying, you are not staying as a victim. You are staying as a soldier. He took her outside. The cold, damp air was a shock. He went to the trunk of his car, the dark, powerful muscle car, and unlocked a heavy steel box. He took out a pistol. It was black, heavy, and smelled of oil. He placed it in her hand. Her fingers instinctively wrapped around the grip, but her hand sagged under the weight. It's heavy, she whispered, her voice awed and terrified. It's supposed to be, he said. It's heavy, so you respect it, so you understand it's not a toy. It's a tool, a last resort. He stood behind her, his body a solid wall of heat against her back. Your feet, shoulder-width apart, he commanded. His voice was no longer a lover's, it was a commander's. His hand covered hers, adjusting her grip, forcing her fingers into the right position. 2 hands, always. His other hand settled on her waist, turning her hips slightly, bracing her. You are not strong enough to fight the recoil, so you will brace for it. You will become part of the gun. She could feel his breath on her neck. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against her back. It was the most intimate and the most terrifying moment of her life. There's a pine cone on that stump. 10 yards. No, 30 feet, he corrected himself, his voice a low rumble in her ear. Breathe out, squeeze the trigger. Do not pull it, squeeze it like you're slowly closing your hand. She did. The sound was a deafening crack that shattered the forest's silence. The recoil was a brutal, jarring kick that slammed her back against his chest. She cried out, her eyes squeezed shut. She missed the stump, the tree, the entire section of the woods. Again, he said, his arms a vice around her, holding her steady. Your eyes were closed. Open your eyes, Elena. You never close your eyes. They stayed out there for an incalculable time, until her arms ached and her ears rang. She fired again and again. She hit the stump. She hit the pine cone. She learned to load the magazine, her fingers fumbling with the brass. She learned the click of the safety. The tension was a living thing between them. It was physical. The press of his body, the heat. It was emotional. The shared danger, the transfer of this dark, terrible knowledge. And it was romantic. A strange, violent intimacy that was more real than the soft, safe bubble had been. When they went back inside, the sun was setting. They were both raw, covered in a fine sheen of sweat, smelling of gunpowder. That night, the house was different. It was not a sanctuary. It was a bunker. They sat before the fire, the steel shutters locked, the loaded gun on the table between them. The desperation that had been building all day, the fear, the note, the gunfire, it all crested. He looked at her. She looked at him. This time, it was she who moved. She crossed the 2 feet of space, knelt in front of him, and put her hands on his knees. He looked down, his face a mask of shadows. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the soft, tentative kiss of the first night. It was a kiss of raw, desperate need. It was a claim. It said, I am here. I am not leaving. You are not leaving. His response was immediate. His hands gripped her waist, pulling her from her knees into his lap. He kissed her back, a deep, bruising kiss that tasted of fear, of power, of a shared, dark fate. It was a frantic, necessary collision, 2 people holding on to the only real thing in a world of chaos. His hands were in her hair. Her fingers were gripping his shirt. It was not passion. It was a desperate anchor, a way of proving they were both still alive. Still human. Later. They lay in the dark bed, the gun on the nightstand. The air was thick with their shared breath and unspoken fears. My stepfather, she said into the darkness. Her voice was flat, a ghost's. Luke, who had been on the edge of sleep, went utterly still. He used to lock me in the closet, she continued, the words spilling out as if the gunfire had dislodged them. He used his hands for everything, for hitting my mother, for hitting me. She paused, the next words a terrible, choking weight, and when I got older, he tried to use them for other things. She felt Luke's body tense, a coil of pure, murderous rage. I fought him, she said quickly. I hurt him with a pair of scissors, and then I ran. I was 16. I never went back. She took a shaky breath. My mother, she just watched. She never said a word. One day, I came home from school, and she was just gone. She left me there. With him. She turned, her face a pale oval in the gloom, looking at his silhouette. That's why, she whispered. That's why I flinched in your car. Why I can't stand being trapped. I don't trust men. I don't trust anyone to stay. He was silent for so long she thought he hadn't heard her. Then, his hand, large and calloused, found hers in the dark. He didn't just hold it, he gripped it, his fingers lacing with hers, a steel trap. I will never, he said, feeling his voice a raw, brutal oath that cut through the darkness, ever hurt you. Not with my fists, not with lies. The promise hung in the air. A man who lived by violence and deception had just sworn off both. Elena let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 10 years. I don't need a savior. Luke, her voice was stronger. I'm not that 16-year-old girl anymore. I don't need you to fight my battles for me. She squeezed his hand. I just need someone who won't leave. He pulled her closer, his arm wrapping around her, pulling her against his chest. He kissed the top of her head, his lips moving against her hair. Then I'm staying, he said. The promise settled over them, a comfort against the dark. They fell asleep like that, a fortress of two. The promise was tested at dawn. Morning came, gray and cold. Elena was the first to wake. She was in the kitchen, her hand on the coffee pot, when Luke appeared in the doorway. He was dressed, his gun already in his waistband. He didn't look at her. He looked at the woods. They're here, he said, his voice flat. Before she could ask who, the world exploded. It was not a sound. It was a feeling, a heavy thud, thud, thud against the side of the house, like a giant pounding. The steel shutters. They were shooting at the house. Heavy caliber rounds, glass shattered from the one window they hadn't covered, a small one over the sink. Down, Luke roared. He tackled her, throwing his body over hers, shielding her as they skidded across the kitchen floor. Gunfire erupted from all sides, a deafening, terrifying hailstorm of bullets shredding the wooden walls, tearing through the furniture. The back! We have to go! He bellowed in her ear. He grabbed her, pulling her, crawling. Keep your head down! Move! They moved through the house, a war zone of splintering wood and flying plaster. He kicked open the back door. The muscle car was parked 30 feet away, their only escape. Run! Get to the car! Keys are in the visor. Don't stop for me. I'm not leaving you! She screamed over the din. Go! He roared, giving her a hard shove into the open. He stepped out behind her, his own pistol blazing, firing into the trees, providing cover. Elena ran. Her legs felt like lead. The air was filled with lethal, invisible hornets. She fumbled with the car door, pulling it open. She heard a sound, a wet, sickening thwack, like a baseball bat hitting a side of beef. Luke grunted, a sharp, pained sound. He stumbled, falling against the side of the car. Luke! He was hit. A dark, spreading stain was blossoming on his shoulder, near his chest. He clutched it, his face pale, but his eyes were still on fire. He shoved her, hard, into the driver's seat. Drive, he bellowed, collapsing into the passenger side, his gun clattering to the floor mat. You're shot! Drive, Elena, he roared, his hand slick with his own blood, grabbing her arm. Drive, now! The car was a black-hearted beast, its engine a roaring, panicked thunder that matched her own. Elena had never driven anything so powerful, and she was doing it on twisting, unlit back roads, the tires spitting gravel as she fought the wheel. Left! Luke grunted from the passenger seat. His voice was a wet, thin rasp. She yanked the wheel, the car sliding, and she screamed as the headlights illuminated a row of trees she had almost met. I cannot do this. "You are," he breathed. He was slumped against the door, his left hand, his good hand, clamped over the bloody ruin of his right shoulder. It was not working. The dark blood was everywhere, soaking the fine leather, filling the car with a coppery, metallic, sharp smell of death. "It's too much," she sobbed, her foot heavy on the accelerator. "It's too much blood. Pressure, Elena, you have to keep pressure." She was driving with one hand, with her other. She reached over, shoving her own small, trembling fist onto his, pressing his hand harder against the wound. He let out a sound, a deep, agonizing groan that tore her in two. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I'm sorry. Where? Luke, where are we going?" "Eri," he panted. "The clinic, another 2 miles. The animal clinic. Sign. With the owl. An animal clinic. You need a hospital." "No hospitals," he commanded, a flash of the old steel in his voice. "Aris, he's a friend." She saw it. A small, weathered sign reflecting her high beams. A carved wooden owl. She slammed on the brakes, turning the wheels so hard the car fishtailed and shot up a long, dark driveway toward a low, dark building. He was fading. His eyes were closing. His face a pale, waxy gray in the dashboard lights. "No," she said, her voice a low growl. She slammed the car into park and unbuckled, leaning over him. "No, you do not. You promised you were staying." She shook him, her bloody handprint staining his good shoulder. "Luke, wake up!" His eyelids fluttered. "You cannot die," she whispered, her voice cracking, the tears streaming down her face, hot and fast. "You cannot leave me. Do you hear me? You promised you would stay, and I cannot lose you. I cannot go back. I will not." The clinic door burst open. A square of yellow light and a man ran out, short, bald, and carrying a medical bag. "Get him inside. On the table, now." Together they hauled Luke from the car, his arms slung over their shoulders. He was a dead weight. They got him through the doors, not into a waiting room, but a sterile, steel operating theater. "Get out!" The man, Aris, snapped at her, already cutting away Luke's blood-soaked shirt. "Wait in the front. He's bleeding." "I am stopping the bleeding. Go!" Elena stumbled into the small, cold waiting room. It smelled of antiseptic and dog food. She stood there, her body vibrating with adrenaline, her hands covered in his blood. She stared at them. Her hands. They were always bleeding. But now, it was not her blood. She sank into a hard plastic chair and waited. Hours passed, the gray light of dawn. The same light that had illuminated the attack began to seep through the blinds. She did not move. She just stared at the tile, her mind replaying every second. The note. "You bleed for him. You'll die for him." The words echoed, taking on a new, terrible meaning. The note was wrong. He was bleeding for her. He had taken a bullet that was meant to be leverage against him. She was the leverage. She was the weakness Marco had named. She was the open wound in his defenses. She thought of his sister, Sophia, the girl he could not save, and she looked at the operating room doors. He was in there, dying or close to it, because he was trying to save her. She would not be the reason he died. She would not be his Sophia. Aris finally emerged, pulling off a surgical mask. His face was streaked with sweat and blood. "He's stable," he said, his voice flat. "It missed the artery, but just barely. He lost a great deal of blood. I gave him 2 pints of my own. He's unconscious. He'll sleep for at least a day, but he will live." Elena's body went limp, the relief so profound it was painful. She let out a single, dry sob. Can I see him?" He was pale, so pale. Against the white sheets of the small recovery cot, an intravenous line was in his good arm. His shoulder was a mountain of white bandages. He looked smaller. He looked human. She stood there, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. He was alive. He was safe. For now. Her resolve hardened. He had saved her from the club. He had saved her from the alley. He had saved her from the street. Now, it was her turn to save him. The only way to do that was to remove the target. She looked around the small office, her eyes landing on Aris's prescription pad. She tore off a single sheet. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. She wrote 5 words. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She placed the note on the small table by his bed, where he would see it the moment he woke. She leaned down, her lips brushing his forehead. A ghost of a touch. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then, without a sound, she turned, walked out of the clinic, and disappeared into the gray. Indifferent morning. Luciano Moretti woke to the smell of antiseptic and the deep, throbbing agony in his shoulder. He knew, before he even opened his eyes, that he was alone. The room was too quiet. The air was too still. He opened his eyes. The room was empty. The cot opposite his was bare. He saw the note. He stared at the 5 words, scrawled in her shaking, familiar handwriting. "Don't bleed for me anymore." And he read it once, twice. A cold, black emptiness replaced the pain. It was a void. And then the void erupted. It was not heartbreak. It was not sadness. It was fury. A pure, volcanic rage that drowned out everything. She had run. After everything. After the safe house. After the promise. After she had told him she needed someone who would not leave. She had run. He ripped the intravenous line from his arm. He ignored the searing pain as he swung his legs off the cot, his bare feet hitting the cold tile. He was on his feet, swaying, when Aris ran in. "What are you doing? You cannot move." "My phone," Luke growled, his voice a stranger's. "Where is my phone?" "Luke, you will kill yourself. You're bleeding." "Give me the phone, Aris, or I will break your arm and take it." Aris, seeing the look in his eyes, retrieved the phone from a plastic evidence bag. Luke dialed 1 number, Marco. "She's gone," he said, his voice a low growl. "She ran." "Boss, I want every man, every street. I want eyes on every bus station, every train, every back alley. Find her. Find her now." He paused, his body shaking with the effort of standing. "And Marco." "Yes, boss. Nonviolent, you understand me? No one touches her. No one frightens her. This is not a hunt, this is a recovery. She is lost. You bring her home." He hung up and sank back onto the cot, his head in his hands, the rage giving way to a cold and terrifying dread. He had not believed her about her stepfather. Not really. He had not understood the depth of her trauma. He thought his promise was enough. He had just sworn he would never leave her, and now he had forced her to run. He had made her believe he was dying for her. "She's going back." He whispered to the empty room. "She's going back to where she knows how to hide." Elena felt like a ghost, haunting her old life. She had taken a bus back to the city, her head down, her face turned to the window. She had gotten off 2 miles from her old neighborhood, the one she had fled before she even knew Luke's name. She was back to her instincts. She knew how to be invisible. She kept to the alleys. She avoided the main streets. She had one goal: to find a cash-in-hand dishwashing job, to find a room in a flophouse, to become the person she was before, to erase Elena Caro and become no one. She was so focused on the police, on the men in suits, that she did not notice the others. She did not notice the low, windowless van that idled at the end of the alley. She was 2 steps from the street when they took her. It was not a fight. It was an abduction. 2 men, brutal and efficient, grabbed her. One clapped a thick, chemical-smelling cloth over her face. She fought, her instincts screaming, but the world went black before she could even land a blow. She woke to the smell of gasoline. Her head was throw-ebbing, her mouth filled with a foul, cottony taste. A heavy, coarse bag was over her head. Her hands were tied behind her, her wrists bound tight to the rungs of a wooden chair. The ropes were thick, new, and they bit into her skin, pulling at the old, thin scars. "She's awake!" A voice she didn't know. The bag was ripped from her head. She was in a vast, dark space. The only light came from a single, bare bulb hanging far overhead, and from the open bay doors that looked out onto a dark, polluted river, a warehouse. A man was standing in front of her, his suit too expensive, his smile too wide. He was older, with slick, dark hair and cold, dead eyes. "Miss Caro," he said, his voice a smooth, oily purr. "A pleasure. We've been looking everywhere for you." "Who are you?" she rasped. "A businessman. a competitor of your friend." He laughed. "My name is Salerno, and you are my guest." He began to walk around her, his shoes clicking on the concrete. "You see, Luke is a man of attachments. He should have learned his lesson. But he did not." He stopped behind her. She could feel his breath on her neck. "This place," he whispered, "is special. Does it feel special? It should. This is where we took care of his sister, Sophia, right in this building." Elena's blood ran cold. "He could not save her," Salerno continued, walking back into the light, holding a red gasoline can. "And now, he cannot save you." He began to pour the gasoline in a wide circle around her chair. The smell was overwhelming, choking. "Where is he?" Elena said, her voice shaking but hard. "Oh, he's looking for you," Salerno said, tossing the empty can aside. "My men are watching his men. They are turning the city upside down. But Trello, that idiot Trello, bless his cowardly heart, he told us everything. He knew where you would run, where you came from. He knew Luke would be wounded. He knew you would be alone." Elena stopped listening. She pulled at the ropes. She twisted her wrists, ignoring the searing, liquid fire as the hemp tore into her skin. The new scars, the old scars, it did not matter. The ropes bit deep, and she felt the warm, familiar, sickening slickness of her own blood. Her hands were bleeding. "He likes to save things," Salerno sneered, pulling a lighter from his pocket. "Let's see if he can save you from the fire. He's here." It was Luke's voice. It came not from the door, but from the shadows above. Salerno froze, his eyes shooting up to the dark rafters. "Luke, come out, Moretti. Come and watch." "I am—" A single shot. The man to Salerno's left, the one who had held the cloth, dropped without a sound. A second shot. The man by the door crumpled. Salerno was alone. He fumbled, pulling his own gun. But he was a boss, not a soldier. He fired wildly into the darkness. "You missed," Luke's voice said. Now from the right, he was moving. He was hunting. Salerno screamed in rage, holding the lighter high. "I'll burn her! I'll burn her! Luke!" He flicked the lighter. A shot rang out, and the lighter flew from his hand, skittering across the concrete. A second shot hit Salerno's knee. He screamed, a high, thin sound, and collapsed. Luciano Moretti dropped from the rafters, landing like a cat, his gun steady. His face a mask of absolute, cold fury. He was still in his blood-stained clothes from the clinic, his shoulder a mass of bandages, but he looked like a god of vengeance. He did not look at Salerno, who was clutching his leg, sobbing. He only looked at Elena. "The gasoline," Elena choked out. The lighter, still lit, was only inches from the edge of the gasoline pool. Luke saw it. He ran, not to the lighter, but to her. He did not have time for the knots. He pulled a combat knife from his boot and, in 1, 2, 3 motions, sliced the ropes from her wrists and ankles. Just as the flame caught, a whoosh of sound and a wall of fire erupted. A perfect circle around them. Elena screamed, throwing herself against him. "I have you!" He roared over the sound of the flames. He didn't look for an exit. He just looked at her, his eyes checking her for wounds. He saw her hands. He saw the raw, bloody pulp where the ropes had been. His face tightened into something beyond rage. He shoved his gun into his waistband, and before she could take a breath, he scooped her up, his good arm under her back, his wounded arm under her knees. He grunted in pain but did not slow. He carried her. He turned his body, his back to the worst of it, and he walked directly through the wall of fire. The heat was instantaneous, searing, stealing the air from her lungs. She buried her face in his chest, clinging to him. He was a man made of iron. He did not flinch. He did not pause. He walked through the fire. He was out, in the cold, damp night air, his clothes smoking. He set her down gently on the pier, his hand on her cheek, his thumb brushing the soot from her face. She was coughing, gasping, her entire body shaking. He looked down at her hands, the blood welling up, dripping onto the wet wood. He knelt, his eyes lit by the fire of the burning warehouse behind them, finding hers. "I told you I'd carry you," he whispered, his voice raw with smoke and a terrible, beautiful tenderness. Every time. The sirens were a distant, screaming lullaby, pulling them from the roaring silence of the fire. Elena was on the wet pier, wrapped in Luke's smoking jacket, her mind a blank, echoing space. He was the one who was wounded, his shoulder bleeding through a fresh bandage he had apparently slapped on at the clinic, but he was the one on his feet, giving orders. He had not let her go. He had carried her from the fire, set her down, and then stood as a shield between her and the world. His men, Marco and 2 others, had appeared from the shadows like magic, their faces grim, their guns drawn. They had secured Salerno, who was whimpering on the concrete, and now they were focused on her. "The hospital," Luke said, his voice a raw rasp, cutting through the crackle of the burning warehouse. "Not Aris's, a real one. Boss, the police." Marco started. "We will be gone before they get here. Get her there, now." She was rushed to the emergency room, not as a victim of a gang war, but as a victim of a terrible accident. Luke's money, his power, moved in front of them like a snowplow, clearing the way. They gave her a private room. They told her she had been in a house fire, that her employer had rescued her. She survived. The diagnosis was minor burns on her face and neck, smoke inhalation, and deep, severe lacerations on her wrists. The doctor, a woman with kind, tired eyes, looked at Elena's hands with a professional pity. "These are old scars," the doctor said gently, cleaning the raw, bloody tracks left by the ropes. "But this is new. You were tied." Elena just nodded, her throat too thick with soot and pain to speak. Luke stood in the corner of the room, a silent, menacing shadow. He had refused all treatment for himself, his own bloody jacket still on, his face streaked with black soot. He looked like a demon guarding a bedside. "She will be safe here?" he asked. The doctor looked at him, unafraid. "She's a patient in a hospital." "Of course. But you," she said, pointing a pen at him, "need to be in a bed. You're bleeding." "I'm fine," he said. And the words were an iron door slamming shut. He waited until the doctor left, until Elena's hands were wrapped in thick, clean, white gauze. They looked like soft, white clubs. She stared at them, the 3rd set of bandages she had worn since meeting him. "Elena," he said. He crossed the room, his footsteps heavy. He sat on the edge of her bed. He did not touch her. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her voice hoarse, gesturing to his shoulder. "It doesn't matter." His eyes were not on her, but on the wall, on a future he was calculating. "They will not touch you again, ever. Salerno, Trello, anyone who even knows your name. I am ending it." "How?" she asked, but she was afraid of the answer. "You cannot kill them all." "No," he said, and his voice was cold, so cold. "I am going to bury them." He stood. "I am leaving. Marco will stay outside your door. You will not be alone. When you are released, he will take you to the penthouse. You will have everything you need. The flower shop is yours. The accounts, everything. It is all in your name now." "Luke, what are you talking about? Where are you going?" He turned, and for a second, the coldness in his eyes cracked, replaced by a deep, aching tenderness that was almost painful to see. "I promised I would stay," he said. "This is me, staying." He walked out of the room. He did not look back. The next time she saw him, it was 2 days later, on the television in her hospital room. Luciano Moretti, head of the Moretti crime family, turning himself in, and he was in a clean suit, his shoulder in a sling, his face impassive, as he walked through a media circus into the downtown police precinct. The news was a firestorm. He had not just surrendered, he had brought evidence. He had offered the city's corrupt police force and the federal government a deal they could not refuse. He gave them the Salernos, their entire operation, their supply lines, their political contacts. He gave them Vince Trello, whose cowardice had started it all. He gave them a list of names, a ledger of crimes that would decimate the city's underworld in exchange. He had asked for 2 things. The first was complete, total, and permanent immunity for a list of his own legitimate businesses, including a small flower shop named Carmine Street Flowers. The second was the protection of its new owner, Elena Caro, who was to be considered an innocent civilian, a victim of the Salerno's violence. And for his own part, for his role in the city's corruption, he would accept a deal. He would plead guilty. The courtroom was a circus. Elena sat in the back row, her hands, now free of bandages but red and raw, clenched in her lap. She wore a simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned. Marco, now her permanent, silent shadow, sat 2 feet away. She felt the whispers, the stares. That's her. That's Moretti's girl. The one he did it all for. And then he entered. He was in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He had been in a holding cell for a week. He looked tired. He looked dangerous. He looked like a caged lion. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at his lawyer. He stood, Mao, and his eyes scanned the gallery, searching, until they found hers. He held her gaze. The judge read the charges. The lawyers spoke. Words like racketeering, conspiracy, and accessory filled the air. But it was all just noise. The only real thing in the room was the silent, unbroken line between his eyes and hers. He was telling her he was sorry. She was telling him she understood. He was telling her to be strong. She was telling him she would wait. "Mr. Moretti," the judge said, his voice booming. "On the charges agreed upon, how do you plead?" Luke kept his eyes on Elena. He did not blink. "Guilty," he said, his voice a low rumble that filled the room. The sentence was 5 years, with the deal, with good behavior. He would be out in 3 years, 36 months. It was an eternity. It was a lifeline. He was let out. He did not look away from her until the doors closed behind him. The first 6 months were the hardest. The world was loud. The whispers followed her. But Elena put her head down, just as she had at the Velvet Room. But this was different. She was not surviving. She was building. She went to the flower shop every day. She was no longer Elena, the terrified girl in the back room. She was Miss Caro, the owner. She learned the flowers. She learned the customers. She learned how to command respect, not with fear, but with a quiet, unshakable competence. The shop thrived. She used her own name. She paid her own bills. She walked to work from the penthouse, which she was slowly, carefully, making her own. She replaced the dark, severe furniture with things that were warm and soft. And every weekend, she took a bus, a 3-hour ride upstate, to the gray, cold walls of the state penitentiary. The visiting room was a symphony of quiet desperation. The first few visits were through glass. They spoke on crackling phones, their voices flat and tinny. They stared at each other, their hands pressed to the partition, a useless gesture. After 6 months, he was moved to a lower security wing. She was approved for contact visits. The first time she sat across from him at a small, bolted-down table in a room filled with other families. She was so nervous she could not speak. He wore the prison-issued blue uniform. He was thinner, his face harder, but his eyes were the same. He reached across the table and, slowly, took her hand. His hand was rough, calloused from the prison workshop. Hers was soft, no longer burned by chemicals, but the scars, the white lines, were still there. He traced the one on her palm, the one from the broken glass. "You're, well," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "You, too," she whispered. They talked, not of the fire, not of the Salernos, not of the blood. He asked about the shop. She told him about the new delivery van. She told him about the trouble she was having with the orchids. He told her about the books he was reading, about the dry, endless work in the library. Their connection, which had been forged in the screaming, violent chaos of fire and blood, was now being reforged in the quiet, patient monotony of waiting. It was no longer a desperate, clinging thing. It was stable. It was real. It was a quiet, domestic intimacy, played out under the watchful eyes of armed guards. One Sunday, a year into his sentence, she brought a cardboard box. "What is this?" he asked, eyeing the small, taped-up box. "It's just something." She pushed it across the table. "You should open it later." He opened it right there. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were letters, dozens of them, small, folded sheets of paper, some of them prescription pad notes, some of them torn from a notebook. Elena?" he asked, his voice confused. "I wrote them," she said, her face flushing. "That week, after I left you at the clinic, before the warehouse. I was hiding. I had no one to send them to. I was just talking to you." He took one out. The paper was cheap, the handwriting a frantic, desperate scrawl. "Luke, I am so sorry. I am a coward. I ran, but I could not be the reason. I could not be your Sophia." He unfolded another. "I am cold. I am back in the alleys. It is all right. I know how to do this. I hope Eris stopped the bleeding. I hope you hate me. It is better if you hate me." He read a third, and a fourth. They were a roadmap of her terror, her guilt, and her undeniable, terrifying love. They were the words she could never say, written by the girl she used to be. Luciano Moretti, the man who had faced down the Salernos, who had walked through fire, who had accepted a prison sentence without flinching, lowered his head, his shoulders, under the blue prison uniform, began to shake. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. She thought he was angry, but when he looked up, his dark, hard eyes were shining. A single tear tracked its way down his cheek, past the scar from her butterfly stitch. He was not crying from sadness. He was crying for her, for the 16-year-old girl who had run, for the woman who had survived, for the absolute, terrifying strength it had taken for her to write those words, and then to give them to him. He reached across the table, his hand cupping the back of her neck, and he pulled her to him, kissing her, right there in the middle of the visiting room. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of absolution. The 3 years passed, one day, then the next. Elena was waiting. It was a cold, gray November morning, the sky the color of prison steel. She stood outside the massive gates, a small, solitary figure. She was not the girl he had met. She was a woman. She wore a dark wool coat, her hair was longer, and her face was calm. The gate buzzed, a harsh, ugly sound. The small pedestrian door opened. He walked out. He was not in a prison uniform. He was in the simple civilian clothes he had worn that first night in the penthouse. A black sweater, dark pants. They looked too big for him. He was thinner. He was harder. He was free. He stopped, 10 feet away. He just looked at her. He drank her in, as if he had been dying of thirst. She smiled, a small, real smile. She did not run to him. She walked, her steps measured, confident. She stopped in front of him. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. She held up a simple paper bag. "I brought you something." He looked at the bag, then at her, a question in his eyes. She reached in. She pulled out 2 pairs of gloves. One pair was black, expensive, made of fine, soft leather. They were for him, a replacement for the ones he had offered her in the alley a lifetime ago. The other pair was for her. They were a soft, cream-colored cashmere, lined with wool. He looked at the gloves. He looked at her hands, the hands he had first seen raw and bleeding in the grime of the velvet room. They were pale, healed, marked only by the thin, white lines of her past. He did not take the gloves. He reached out and took her hand, his, rough from prison, hers, soft from the shop. His fingers, large and strong, laced with hers, small and scarred, they just stood there for a moment, fingers intertwined. Then they turned. Together, they walked away from the prison, toward the car she had parked down the street, toward the city, toward the rest of their lives. Neither of them looked back. They walked in silence for a long time. Finally, she looked up at him, her hand tight in his. "You carried me," she said. He looked down at her, his dark eyes, for the first time, completely at peace. He brought her scarred hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. Now we walked together. "Thank you so much for listening to our story. We poured our hearts into bringing Elena and Luke's journey to life, and we are so grateful you joined us. We would love to know where you are listening from, so drop a comment and say hello. For more stories that will grip your heart, please subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories. And finally, what did you think? Did you feel the cold, the fear, the fire? Please share your thoughts with us in English. We read every single one.